In a small, quiet town in Oregon, a crime occurs that shocks even experienced investigators. The Ashwood family had always been a model family, but in the early morning of the 15th of April 2025, it ceased to exist. Only 12-year-old Samantha remained alive, and precisely her silence worries the police the most. During the night at 3:42, the Maple Ridge police received an emergency call from the Ashwood family's neighbors. The officers arrived 6 minutes later and found a scene that shocked even experienced personnel. Lauren Ashwood, her husband Richard, and their son Nathan were found without signs of life. The only survivor was 12-year-old Samantha Ashwood. She was found sitting on the steps of the back porch, silent and absent, as if she did not perceive what had happened. The house seemed almost untouched at first glance. The entrance doors were not damaged, the windows intact. Traces of a struggle or break-in were not discovered. The alarm system installed in the house had been manually deactivated from inside, but by whom exactly is still unknown. Samantha made no statements and refused to answer the police's questions. Half an hour later, she was brought to the station for further questioning and examination by a psychologist. The first search of the property brought to light a series of unusual details. The murder weapons, a heavy hammer and a kitchen knife with blood traces were found in the forest, about 27 meters behind the house. Someone had obviously tried to hide them hastily by only superficially covering them with branches. Inside the house, a single fogged glass of water stood on the kitchen table. The fingerprint examination showed several smeared prints, but the owner could not be identified so far. The glass had obviously been used shortly before the police arrived, but by whom exactly is unknown. The Ashwood family's neighbor, 56-year-old Robert McAllister, stated that during the night, a strange note was slipped under his door with the text, "They will come." He did not take the threat seriously and considered it a bad joke by teenagers from the neighborhood. Nevertheless, the note was confiscated for handwriting analysis, whose results are not yet available. During the first examination of Richard Ashwood's mobile phone, the investigators discovered a fresh order in an online hunting supplies shop. It had been placed literally the evening before. Among the purchased items was a hunting axe. No axe was found at the crime scene, which raised additional questions. Based on the initial data, the investigation began with the examination of two main versions. The first version, the intrusion of a stranger into the Ashwood family's house. This is complicated by the absence of obvious break-in traces and the fact that the alarm system was deactivated from inside. Experts are already working on checking all possible access points. The second version, a family conflict. So far, however, nothing indicates a conflict between family members. The house was tidy and organized. No traces of a struggle inside were found. According to the preliminary assessment of the criminalists, the events unfolded quickly, and the family members possibly did not even have time to react. A statement was made by Chris Boyd, the Ashwood family's closest neighbor who lives across the street. He claims to have seen strange light flashes in the house windows around 3 in the morning, but heard no noise or screams. Despite the absence of direct evidence, his strange behavior attracted the police's attention. Boyd was brought to the station for questioning but was released after an hour. His version matched the statements of other neighbors and the surveillance camera recordings. The most important discovery of the first hours was the forensic examiner's report. The injuries that Richard Ashwood and his son Nathan had suffered were inflicted with different weapons. This means there could be more than one perpetrator, although the investigators are still holding back with official conclusions. The investigators decided to order an extended DNA analysis of all objects found on the property, including the glass, the note, the knife, the hammer, and the family members' clothing. This will make it possible to determine exactly who else was in the house on the night of the 15th of April. The investigations continue with the examination of neighbors and acquaintances of the Ashwood family. The investigators cannot explain one thing: the complete absence of emotions in Samantha Ashwood after what had happened to her relatives. Samantha's behavior became the main subject of analysis for the police. The officers note, she did not cry, asked no questions, and did not even ask to call someone from the circle of her relatives or acquaintances. At this point, the investigators gained access to Samantha Ashwood's school file and studied the school psychologist's reports. These documents gave the investigation a new direction. During the past year, the school psychologist had recorded several disturbing conversations with Samantha. In her file, complaints about constant fear of being abandoned were noted. The formulations are simple, but the investigator notes that this fear did not occur randomly and not just once, but became a systemic condition. The psychologist emphasized the necessity of drawing the parents' attention to this. The next day, during a renewed search of Samantha's room in the Ashwood house, the police discovered a special collection, carefully gathered clippings from newspapers and magazines dealing with divorces, orphans, and children's homes. These clippings were kept neatly folded under the bed, like a hidden secret. The investigators note that this was obviously collected over a long period. Now the entire collection has been confiscated and handed over to experts for further psychological evaluation. The police officers invited Samantha again for a detailed conversation. The conversation took place without the presence of a lawyer or relatives, which fully complies with Oregon state laws in cases of suspicion of a serious crime by minors. To the investigator's question, "Samantha, where exactly were you at the time of the crime?" The girl answers evenly and briefly, "I was sleeping in my room." The investigator notes that the voice is even and calm. In her statements, there is no confusion, although details are missing. To the clarifying question, "How did you wake up?" she explains briefly, "I woke up from a loud noise and went to check if everything was all right." Her neutral tone and the absolute absence of visible excitement or tension are emphasized. Next, when presenting the preliminary investigation results, the investigator asks a direct question. "Why were your fingerprints found on the knife?" Samantha does not hesitate, answers quickly and confidently. "I wanted to check on my parents and got smeared with blood." Despite the apparent convincingness of the explanation, the investigators note doubts. In her words lies a certain unspokenness, a lack of details, and an emphasized brevity, as if it were a prepared answer. The investigation considers the psychologist's preliminary report that Samantha may have faced so-called stress-related amnesia. The police officers admit that Samantha, given her mental state and vulnerability, could have been used as a scapegoat. In this context, the police are not rushing with accusations, but instead carefully examining the possibility of external influence and manipulation of the girl by someone from the closest environment. For now, the version of her conscious participation is set aside. The investigation directs its attention to the possible manipulation of Samantha's behavior by a third person to lay a false trail. But toward evening, the criminalists transmit a new important discovery to the department. During a detailed examination of the knife, microfibers were found on the inside of the blade. The forensic examination confirms they are fibers from the pajamas that Samantha wore on the night of the crime. This is currently the most significant evidence of Samantha's direct involvement in what happened, although the motives and circumstances of this involvement are still unclear. This discovery drastically changes the investigation's tactics. Now, police and media begin to seriously scrutinize the Ashwood family to understand whether there were hidden conflicts in the family that could lead to such consequences. The attention of the public and investigators shifts to the past of the adult family members, the relationships within the house, and the external connections of the Ashwoods. The police begin to question friends, acquaintances, and relatives of the Ashwood family en masse. They search for any clues about conflicts, tensions, secrets that could explain Samantha's behavior and actions. Interest in the details of family life increases sharply, and every little detail becomes important. 3 months before the tragedy, Lauren Ashwood opens a secret bank account. The investigators only established this fact now, when the examination of the family's bank documents became more thorough and systematic. Neither her husband nor anyone else from their circle seemed to have been informed about it. Lauren kept this account strictly secret from all family members. A detailed analysis of Lauren's banking activities shows a series of covert transfers to a separate deposit account. In the last 3 months, she regularly transferred small amounts to avoid attracting the attention of the bank and her husband. The last transfer, the largest, $5,000, was made one day before the tragedy. In total, about $28,000 were saved. The investigators also gained access to Lauren's personal correspondence. Among the numerous emails, one was discovered that was sent to a lawyer 2 weeks before the tragic events. The text of the letter is laconic and cautious but meaningful. I need a safe place for the children. Urgent. The lawyer refuses to comment for now, citing client confidentiality, but the police are already preparing an official request for disclosure of correspondence details. In the course of the investigation, the police pose crucial questions to clarify whether anyone else from the family could have known about Lauren Ashwood's secret account. The first important question: did Richard Ashwood know about his wife's secret finances? Richard's computer and emails were completely checked by experts. No traces of correspondence regarding this matter were found. However, the criminologists discovered another problem. Richard's browser history from the last year is full of regular visits to gambling websites. This led the investigators to conclude that Richard might have had serious financial difficulties that the family knew nothing about. The second question that interests the investigation: were there conflicts with the son, Nathan Ashwood? The examination of Nathan's phone and personal correspondence showed outbursts of aggression and adolescent resentment about the family situation. In recent weeks, Nathan wrote short, irritated messages to his friends. One of them attracted particular attention. "Mom ruins everything. She doesn't let me live in peace." These words are recorded as a possible sign of family conflict, but the police draw no hasty conclusions. At the same time, the investigation develops another version of events. Analysts assume that the secret account and correspondence with the lawyer could mean that Lauren was planning to stage a threat to the family from an outsider, possibly to move away and start a new life with Samantha and Nathan. The investigators even began to check Lauren's connections outside of Oregon to find traces of possible preparations for a move or contacts that could have helped her. So far, however, the investigation has yielded no results. On the evening of the 20th of April, the police received the first results of the analysis of a video recording extracted from Lauren's personal computer. The recording was made 48 hours before the tragedy. The image does not show the conversation partner's face. The camera is directed only at Lauren. The woman appears tense and somewhat irritated, speaks urgently and harshly, almost demandingly. "I need guarantees. I won't do anything until I get guarantees." There is no response from the second party on the recording, and the sound was initially of poor quality, but experts managed to partially restore it. The results of the voice analysis lead to an unexpected turn in the investigation. The police announced that Lauren Ashwood's conversation partner is a male teenager, definitely not her husband. And it is not the voice of an adult man, but of an adolescent, approximately the age of her son Nathan. The police are cautious in their conclusions and do not officially identify the voice for now, but the version of an external threat not coming from the husband becomes increasingly likely. The investigators intensify the search for other contacts of Lauren, particularly among teenage acquaintances who surrounded her son. Now the investigators' attention focuses on the new facts revealed by the financial investigation and analysis of the recordings. The Ashwood family no longer appears as calm and exemplary as their neighbors knew them. Now it is full of hidden conflicts and secrets that gradually surface and change the entire picture of the crime. Unexpectedly, a witness reports who nobody had taken seriously before. Several residents informed the police that they had seen a vagrant near the Ashwood house at night. The investigators are forced to verify this fact to rule out an external threat. But soon the story becomes more complicated through new discoveries. The police officers quickly identified the nocturnal visitor. It was Lewis Hayes, a 47-year-old man without permanent residence who was well known in Maple Ridge. That evening, he was captured by surveillance cameras of a 24-hour store located 1.5 kilometers from the Ashwood's house. The recording time is precise, 2:30 in the morning. Luis bought cigarettes, which documentarily confirmed his presence in the town. In parallel, the investigators checked the GPS location of Nathan Ashwood's phone. The data confirmed an unexpected fact. Nathan left the house at 2:10 and returned only at 2:47. This means he was absent for about 37 minutes, which logistically fits completely with the distance to the store and back. However, Nathan is not visible on the store's camera recordings, which means his route and destination remain unknown for now. The investigation analyzes Louis Hayes' alibi in detail. Experts carefully check his route and the time of his movement. Considering the walking speed of an average person of 5 kilometers per hour, Louis would not have had time to walk from the store to the Ashwood's house and return in such a short time. Louis's alibi is completely confirmed, documented by official records and video recordings. Nevertheless, during the search of Louis, a suspicious object was found. A handmade backpack containing a letter with a phrase already known to the investigators. "They will come." The handwriting analysis confirmed that the handwriting of the note was identical to that which Robert McAllister, the Ashwood's neighbor, had received. This briefly redirected the police's attention back to Louis. The version of blackmail emerged. The investigators suspected that Louis Hayes might have used the threatening letters to extort money or exploit the growing tension in the Ashwood family. The version seemed convincing, given Richard's financial difficulties and Lauren's secret account. But just a few hours later, it turned out that Louis had no connection to the family members, neither correspondence nor phone calls. Nobody from the family had mentioned his name before. No money transfers to him were found. The handwriting analysis additionally established that the writing samples taken from Louis Hayes categorically did not match the handwriting on the found letters. The handwriting had been artificially altered, obviously by someone who was trying to lead the investigation on a false trail. Precisely at this moment, the police received the results of another analysis. On the envelope with the threats, a clear DNA trace was found that this time leaves no doubt. This DNA belongs to Samantha Ashwood. The fact of her involvement in the story with the threats significantly changes the direction of the investigation. Now, the police have sufficient grounds to question Samantha again. This time, it is decided to conduct the conversation with the involvement of a forensic psychologist who is capable of uncovering the subtleties of Samantha's behavior and condition. The investigation approaches the final psychological reconstruction of the events of that night. The investigators cautiously emphasize that despite the unexpected turn with the letters and Samantha's involvement, it is still too early to draw final conclusions. The situation has become much more complicated than it seemed in the first hours after the tragedy. The question of a stranger at the Ashwood family's house is practically removed from the agenda, but the investigators do not officially announce this yet. The entire story of Louis Hayes was carefully checked and legally concluded, but the police leave a small window of uncertainty open and maintain professional caution. This case is extremely dramatic. Lies destroyed not only a happy marriage, but also the life of a woman who believed in her husband's honesty and dreamed of having her own family. Soon, however, it turned out that he was a master of deception, and in order to hide his secrets, committed terrible acts. Lori Kay Suarez was born on the 31st of December 1976 in California, USA. Nothing is known about her biological parents except that she was adopted by a couple from Fullerton, Thelma and Gerald Suarez. Gerald, who comes from Brazil, met his wife during missionary work in Rio de Janeiro, after which they emigrated to California and took Lori into their family. Lori spent the first years of her life with her adoptive parents, but at 11 years old, she moved with her mother to Orem in the state of Utah after their divorce. In 1994, 18-year-old Lori met 19-year-old Mark Hocking during a trip with friends. Their meeting was fateful. They became inseparable. 5 years later, they married and impressed friends and family with their strong and close bond. Mark seemed to be the perfect husband, loving, caring, and hardworking. But behind this facade hid a web of lies. In 2004, when the tragic events occurred, Laurie was an ambitious and hardworking 27-year-old woman who worked as a manager's assistant. Colleagues described her as a goal-oriented, intelligent, and determined person. Mark, on the other hand, claimed to have graduated from the University of Utah and to be preparing for medical school, which was far from the truth. But at this time, he had convinced his wife and her relatives. So that Mark could continue his studies, the family planned a move to North Carolina. Additionally, the couple learned that Laurie was 5 weeks pregnant. Everything seemed perfect. The woman had already quit her job, and there were only a few weeks left until her last day of work and the move. But all plans shattered on the 19th of July 2004, when Laurie allegedly left the house and never returned. That morning around 10 o'clock, Mark called his wife's office to ask about her whereabouts, but an employee said she had not yet arrived. This was strange, as Laurie was always very punctual. Mark told Laurie's boss that his wife had left around 5:30 in the morning for her usual run to the nearby park, but had not returned home. He suspected that Laurie might have driven directly to work and taken the car. The boss found this strange and advised Mark to call the police. Mark followed the advice and called the police around 10:07 in the morning. He also called Laurie's friends to find out if anyone knew where she might be. However, no one had contact with her that day. Mark called the police again at 10:49 and reported that he had searched for his wife on the road to the park and found her car in the driveway, but no trace of Laurie in it. He asked for help with the search, but the police replied that one had to wait at least 24 hours to file a missing person report. In the meantime, Laurie's family, friends, and colleagues decided to help Mark with the search. Some relatives even traveled from other parts of the country, but unfortunately there was no progress in the search. On the 20th of July, the police joined the search actions begun by Laurie's family. They held a press conference and called on the public to help search for the pregnant woman. Hundreds of posters with her photo and contact numbers were hung up in the city, and the media reported extensively on the case, which attracted more than 1,000 volunteers. Despite all efforts, no traces of Laurie could be found. Mark, her husband, appeared extremely concerned during his appearances in front of the cameras. Early in the morning of the same day, the police received a report about his strange behavior near a hotel. Mark was dressed only in sandals and so agitated that he had to be admitted to the psychiatric department of the University of Utah. People who knew the family believed that the disappearance of his pregnant wife might have triggered an emotional breakdown in him. They saw no reason to suspect him in connection with Laurie's disappearance. Nevertheless, the police had a different opinion and suspected Mark from the beginning of her disappearance. During the large-scale search actions, the facade of concern that he showed in the media began to crumble. Mark deceived everyone around him, including his wife, about his education. He assured Laurie and her family that he had graduated from the University of Utah with distinction in psychology and had begun medical studies in North Carolina. That is why they were planning the move. But Mark's father, Douglas Hacking, knew the truth that the others did not know. On the 22nd of July, he shared this information with the media. It turned out that his son had never received a bachelor's degree and had dropped out of studies in 2002, although he gave the appearance of attending lectures, studying, and writing papers. Mark even traveled through the country and pretended to participate in interviews at various medical schools. Douglas claimed that no medical school had accepted his son, and all of this had been a carefully planned deception. Mark lied because of the pressure associated with expectations of academic success, since his entire family worked in the medical field. The father was a pediatrician, the mother a nurse, and his brothers had achieved scientific successes. Laurie's family was shocked by Mark's deception, but they did not let this distract them from searching for Laurie. Many of those involved in the search thought that if he could lie about his education, he could also lie about Laurie's fate. Others, however, were of the opinion that a lie about education did not necessarily make him guilty of the disappearance. When Mark was questioned about this, he denied any involvement. Nevertheless, the police were of a different opinion. From the beginning, Mark was considered a suspect as evidence against him accumulated. The police were convinced that they were dealing with a first-degree crime. When searching the couple's apartment, the investigators found several clues: a damaged mattress with springs, a receipt for a new mattress, bedding, strange dark red stains on kitchen utensils, carpet pieces in a nightstand in the bedroom, clothing, and an alleged letter from Laurie that was found in a guest room. What particularly caught the police's attention was the fact that on the morning of Laurie's disappearance, when he claimed to have searched the park and then called the police, Mark was actually busy buying a new mattress. Additionally, the front seat of Laurie's car, which was found near the park, was adjusted for a person of about 180 centimeters in height, while Laurie was only slightly over 150 centimeters tall. Laurie's car keys were found in the house, which raised questions. If she really went to the park to exercise, why did the keys stay at home? Among the various pieces of evidence found at different locations was also a cut-up mattress that matched the bed in the bedroom, and which was discovered in a dumpster near the University of Utah hospital. A lock of dark hair was also found in a dumpster near a gas station located next to the hospital. Numerous materials were secured from the two cars that belonged to Mark and Laurie, and surveillance footage from the hospital, the church in the park, and the 24-hour store added new details to the case. With the accumulation of evidence, the suspicions against Mark became stronger and stronger, and it became increasingly clear that the chances of finding Laurie alive were diminishing with each day. Within a few days after Laurie's disappearance, the police collected numerous pieces of evidence indicating that Mark might have committed the crime early in the morning of the 19th of July in their shared house and disposed of the evidence several hours later at an unknown location. The investigators' suspicions were confirmed on the 25th of July 2004 when Mark's brothers, Scott and Lance, reported that the man had confessed the act to them. The day before, on the 24th of July, they visited him in the psychiatric clinic where he was staying and pleaded with him to tell what had happened to Laurie. They gave him time to think, and when they returned in the evening, he confessed his involvement. The exact circumstances of the incident remained unknown. However, it turned out that Laurie on Friday, the 16th of July, when she was at work, called the medical school of North Carolina to obtain information about financial support and learned that her husband was not enrolled there. Colleagues noticed that Laurie was upset and crying after this call. She left work earlier and went home, probably to talk to Mark. According to court documents, Laurie called a university employee around 5 o'clock in the evening of the same day and left a voice message saying that Mark explained her absence from the lists through a computer error or another excuse. She apparently believed him, because on the evening of the same day they went together to a party at his boss's country house and seemed to have a good time. The truth always comes to light, and the discussion about the deception came on a Sunday afternoon, the 18th, when Mark revealed to his wife that he had lied about his education and his future plans. This was a great disappointment for Laurie. After that, Laurie went to sleep while Mark played video games. Later, he began to pack some boxes for the upcoming move. The documents state that while packing things, he allegedly came across a rifle and then around 1 o'clock at night entered the bedroom where Laurie was sleeping. Mark told his brothers that he subsequently wrapped evidence in several garbage bags, including the damaged part of the mattress, and threw everything into a dumpster around 2 o'clock in the morning. Mark's shocking confession to his brothers led to his arrest on the 2nd of August 2004 and his admission to the psychiatric clinic of the Salt Lake County Jail. The prosecutors confirmed that the crime was committed after it became known that Mark had lied to his wife. A week later, he was charged with a first-degree crime and 3 counts of obstruction of justice. Initially, the bail was set at $500,000, but later increased to $1 million. His confession also led to the end of the search for Laurie as a missing person, and the police began searching for evidence in the county landfills, hoping to find clues about this case. However, This proved to be a difficult task. The experts were given a difficult task by advancing through 1,000 tons of confiscated garbage to a depth of more than 12 meters. The search involved sniffer dogs and 38 volunteers, including police officers, firefighters, public safety service employees, and members of the city search and rescue group. Each of them worked an average of 11 hours a day, 4 days a week, and performed arduous tasks with the help of special equipment. Finally, they had to search through the garbage manually. Although all participants believed that their efforts were justified, they had no certainty of finding evidence. Nevertheless, the authorities were convinced that they had sufficient grounds to charge Mark, based on his confession to his brothers, which would most likely be accepted in court. Among the various material evidence, burgundy stains were found in her car, on the railings, on the headboard of the bed, and on the mattress. In the kitchen, a tool was found that was allegedly used to cut up the mattress. The police also had a letter from Laurie that was presumably written one day before her disappearance. In it, she asked her husband to change his behavior and expressed the desire to grow old with him, but not under these circumstances. These words became clearer after Mark's confession, as the letter was connected to a phone call from Laurie to the medical school. Furthermore, the prosecutors collected surveillance videos from a 24-hour store showing Mark buying cigarettes, looking at his hands and fingers, and then driving away in his wife's car. About 18 minutes had passed since the time when, according to his statements, he had committed the crime. The investigators obtained video recordings showing a person throwing a large bag into a dumpster. It was also visible how he drove his wife's car into a park, from where she disappeared, according to his statements. Initially, it was expected that the prosecution would demand the harshest punishment for Mark, but the prosecutors decided to charge him with a first-degree crime, which provides for a sentence of 5 years to life imprisonment. This decision was made because of the absence of decisive evidence. A few days later, Mark appeared together with his lawyer, Gilbert Ante, for a preliminary hearing before Judge William Barrett at the 3rd District Court. Those present were surprised that the defendant wore a bulletproof vest and was accompanied by 7 sheriffs. Such security measures are normally taken in prominent cases or under unexpected circumstances. More than 2 months after Laurie's disappearance, her family had already given up hope. But in October, Sergeant Nelson from the police found decisive evidence in a dumpster. The location was quickly cordoned off, and experts collected evidence for several hours that could be used in court. On the same day, the authorities were able to confirm through forensic examinations that the evidence found was connected to Laurie's case. This news triggered mixed feelings in her family. On one hand, there was disappointment about the confirmation of their worst fears. On the other hand, relief that they could finally say goodbye to her. The prosecutors now believed that the evidence found had significantly advanced the case, as they could now prove the consequences of Mark's crime. On the 30th of October, Mark participated in a hearing for the indictment at the 3rd District Court. Surprisingly, he pleaded not guilty. Laurie's mother expressed her displeasure that he refused to plead guilty and accused him of prolonging the family's experience and delaying the inevitable. The court proceedings, which were scheduled for the end of April 2005, were interrupted on the 15th of April when Mark made a confession. He described to the judge in detail how he committed the crime on the morning of the 19th of July 2004. With his guilty plea, he agreed with the prosecutors to dismiss the charges for obstruction of justice. During his 10-minute speech, Mark confessed that his wife was the most important person in his life, and he could not explain his actions. Laurie's mother was the only one who expressed sincere regret. She was shattered by the confession, but also felt relief that Mark took responsibility for his actions. 1 month before the sentencing, Laurie's parents decided to remove the name Hacking from her memorial plaque to distance themselves from Mark. On the 6th of June 2005, Mark was sentenced. He received a sentence of 6 years to life, with the possibility of parole at the earliest in the year 2035. Mark cried when he heard the verdict and was taken to the Utah State Prison to serve his sentence. After the trial, Mark's parents issued a statement in which they acknowledged his crime as unforgivable, but pointed out that he was struggling with mental problems, including learning disabilities and emotional stress from failures at the university. Mark's father read aloud a letter from him in which he wrote that he felt good in prison, as he was trying to correct his mistakes and apologize to everyone he had hurt with his actions. In the year 2006, it became known that Mark was selling autographs and other things from prison on a website dedicated to the memory of criminals. After a conversation with the prison administration, he voluntarily stopped these activities. In the following years, Laurie's mother exchanged letters with the imprisoned Mark and informed him that she had forgiven him. Despite her decision to leave the past behind, she continues to remember Laurie and says that she can never overcome the loss. In the middle of the school day, a student disappeared. At first, everyone thought that she had simply run away and would return soon. But the more the investigators delved into the case, the more disturbing details became obvious. They needed 27 years to solve this case and bring the truth to light. In the end, everything was much more complicated than they had ever thought. Kiplan Davis was born on the 1st of July 1979 in the small American town of York, Utah. She was the oldest sister in the family, had caring parents, and many friends. Kiplan was known for her friendliness and her talent for getting along well with other children. She attended the local high school and participated in the theater club. In May 1995, when she was 15 years old, Kiplan was very much looking forward to the summer vacation. Her birthday was approaching, and there were only 2 months left until then. Additionally, she was preparing to get her driver's license. On the 2nd of May, Kiplan planned to get up at 4:30 in the morning to go to driving lessons before the start of the school day. But after she had turned off the alarm clock, she continued sleeping and only woke up when her father woke her half an hour later. Kiplan really wanted to sleep a little more and tried to persuade her father to allow her to skip a driving lesson, assuring him that this would not affect her driving test. Her father, who understood how important this event was for her, insisted that she go to class. He knew how much she was looking forward to the driver's license and told her to get ready for class. Kiplan was disappointed. She really wanted to sleep a little more, and she barely had time to put on makeup and get ready. Nevertheless, she listened to her father and went to class, knowing that he only wanted the best for her. She was upset because of her parents, but still got into her mother's car, who brought her to class. Around 3:30, Kiplan's father returned from work and noticed that his daughter was not at home. This worried him, as she was always home at this time. He suspected that the girl had stayed at school or had gone for a walk with friends. He decided to check the voicemail on the house phone, hoping that Kiplan had left a message to explain her delay. Instead, however, he found a message from the school secretary, informing him that the girl had missed all classes after lunch. The father was immediately alarmed as his daughter never skipped school without warning. He immediately called his wife, but she also did not know where their daughter was. The parents waited a while longer, hoping that she would return, but that did not happen. Then they began calling her school friends, but none of them had seen Kiplan after lunch, which only increased their concern. The friends had also stayed at school and had not missed any classes. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, the parents drove to the school to try to find the girl there, but the search was unsuccessful. The building mainly contained teachers and other staff, but no one had seen Kiplan. After that, the parents went to the church that their daughter regularly attended, but she was not there either. Kiplan's parents, concerned about her disappearance, decided to contact the police. However, the police officers initially suspected that the girl might have simply gone for a walk with friends and would return soon. They did not immediately begin searching, but limited themselves to sending a description to the patrol officers. The parents insisted that Kiplan would never disappear all day without warning and miss classes. Despite these assurances, the investigators hesitated to start a search operation. In search of their daughter, the parents contacted their daughter's friends and acquaintances until they received the first important clue. A classmate reported that he had seen Kiplan at lunchtime. She was talking to a boy named Chris, who attended the upper grades and was with her in theater class. This Chris had a reputation as a problem child, according to classmates, which further increased the parents' worries. A few hours earlier, the parents had already heard the name Chris when they searched their daughter's diary, hoping to find clues. The diary contained nothing about plans to run away from home, but a few days ago, Kiplan wrote that she liked Chris. The parents suspected that she might have skipped school to spend time with him, since they had forbidden her to meet with boys before her 16th birthday. That could explain why she told no one about her departure. Nevertheless, the parents could not believe that their daughter would leave school and disappear until late at night. When Kiplan Davis's father did not know what to do, he decided to visit Chris to find out more. He went to his house and knocked on the door. Chris's sister opened for him and explained that Chris had not come home since morning and was probably still at school to deal with theatre club matters. Chris had many tasks related to preparing the stage and props, so he often stayed until late at night. Kiplan's father went to the school. It was already after 10 o'clock in the evening, and the school doors were locked. He knocked several times, but no one opened. After waiting in front of the school for a while, he decided to return to Chris's house to ask his sister about Chris's whereabouts. When he arrived there after midnight, he saw several cars in front of the house, one of which he immediately recognized. It was Walker's car, a classmate of Chris. The man suspected that Chris might be in the house, but was not sure. Since he was not sure whether Chris was involved in the situation, Kiplan's father decided not to disturb them again. He got in the car and drove home. The next morning, the young woman still had not come home, and finally the police began the investigation. The officers searched all classrooms in the school and asked the students to share any information about Kiplan Davis's disappearance, even if it seemed insignificant to them. The police did everything possible to inform every student at the school about what had happened and waited for any clues. They began to check possible involvement by Chris. An investigator spoke with him, and Chris told that he and Kiplan had talked about dance moves for the upcoming performance during lunch and had practiced them, after which their paths separated. He had not seen her since then. After class, Chris went to the auditorium to prepare it for the performance and left the building around 11 o'clock in the evening. Since he was active in the theatre club, the school administration had given him keys to the entrance door, which explained why the doors were locked when Kiplan's father came to the school. Chris also reported that two of his friends, Roker and Tim, were with him at school. They helped him install the spotlights, then played football, and went home. The police found no evidence of Chris's involvement in Kiplan's disappearance. During the conversation with the investigator, he was completely calm and answered all questions willingly. Chris had no criminal past, apart from frequent truancy. When the investigators spoke with Tim and Roker, they heard the same story as from Chris. All three had an alibi, but it could not be confirmed. There were no surveillance cameras in the school, and the boys had no mobile phones with location tracking to verify their position that day. As a result, the investigators were once again left without clues. The police officers continued their conversations with the students and made announcements over loudspeakers, hoping that someone would reveal new information. They suspected that Kiplan's disappearance had something to do with the school. In her locker were all her things: handbag, makeup bag, and school books. This indicated that she had not planned to leave, and reinforced the suspicion that something criminal had happened. Soon, the investigators found a new lead. A student told that Kiplan had been invited to a date by a boy named Brandon on the day of her disappearance. Although her parents had forbidden her to meet with boys, she agreed to a meeting on the weekend. But during lunch break, Brandon came to Kiplan again and said that he could not come to the date. He had another girlfriend who became angry when she learned about his plans. Therefore, he decided to cancel the date. The police spoke with Brandon and his girlfriend, who confirmed this story. Soon, however, something interesting emerged. It turned out that Brandon had missed all classes after lunch, exactly like Kiplan. Even more disturbing was that his girlfriend, who was the class representative, refused to change his absences. The investigators suspected that Brandon and Kiplan had decided to skip school and go to their date. They interrogated the boy again, and he confessed that after lunch he tried to find Kiplan to apologize to her, but she was nowhere to be found. Brennan decided to skip the remaining classes and went home. He had even come up with an excuse for that day. On the way home, he had a breakdown. A tire was flat, and he called a friend to help him change the tire. However, when the police contacted this friend, it turned out that the alibi was fabricated. The friend said that Brennan had not called him and had not asked for help. Brennan was summoned for interrogation again, but despite his friend's statement, he stuck to his version. The investigators even had the impression that he was telling the truth, as the young man was calm and confident. The investigators could not get any new information from him and continued the investigation in other ways. For weeks, there were no new clues in this case. Finally, the FBI was involved in the investigations, but they too could not find any additional evidence. Months after the girl's disappearance, witnesses came forward claiming to have seen her after lunch that day. Some said they had seen her at school, others in the city center. However, none of these testimonies could be confirmed. Furthermore, the investigators received disturbing rumors that were circulating at the school. It was said that Kipling was involved in an accident in which 4 boys were involved. The investigators tried to find the sources of these rumors, but each time they hit a dead end. Chris, Rocker, Tim and Brandon were interrogated again, but each of them repeated the same thing as in the first days after Kiplin's disappearance. The case was stuck for a whole year until suddenly something strange happened. Chris came to Kiplin's father and said he wanted to remove a heavy burden from himself by sharing important information. After a few tense seconds, he said, "I want you to know that I have nothing to do with Kiplin's disappearance." The father was stunned and expected that Chris would finally tell the truth, but he behaved strangely. A year after the girl's disappearance, he came to her parents' house to once again assert that he had nothing to do with it. The father suspected that Chris wanted to tell the truth, but got scared at the last moment. The man bombarded him with questions and demanded explanations about his daughter's disappearance. But the boy insisted on his innocence and finally just left. The father immediately reported the incident to the investigators, and they found Chris's behavior suspicious. The police decided to interrogate all 4 again using a lie detector. They began with Chris, who continued to claim that he was innocent and knew nothing. The lie detector operator found no signs of lies, which somewhat confused the investigators. But they knew that a lie detector is not absolute proof of truth, and therefore did not consider his statements decisive. After speaking with Tim, they asked him to write down his memories of that day. The investigators expected his story to be the same as before, but they were shocked. Suddenly, Tim told a completely different story. According to his words, he, Kiplan, and Roker decided after lunch to skip class and drive to the local canyon. When they arrived, Tim stayed in the car while Kiplan and Roker went for a walk. After some time, Roker came back alone, and Tim asked where Kiplan was. Roker answered something like, "Don't worry about it," and they drove away. This story stunned the police, but it seemed doubtful to them. However, for the first time in a year, Tim changed his statement, and the investigators put pressure on him, hoping to get more details. Unfortunately, this led to the opposite. Tim threw the sheet with his statements in the trash, demanded a lawyer, and said not another word. These statements could not be used in court and gave the police no reason to arrest the 2 boys. The police called Roker for interrogation and told him about Tim's new statements. The young man denied everything Tim had said and claimed not to have seen Kiplan again after lunch. Remarkably, this time too, the lie detector showed no signs of deception, but the investigators remained skeptical. Without a confession, they could only hope for physical evidence that could connect the suspects with the incident. Together with volunteers and relatives, the investigations for Kiplan in the canyon began. The investigators used heavy machinery for the excavations, while volunteers searched every inch of ground for clues, and search dogs tried to pick up a trace of the missing person. Despite the great effort, the results failed to materialize, and the case stagnated for several years. In 1999, Kiplan's relatives accepted their loss and held a farewell ceremony by placing a memorial plaque in the local cemetery. They hoped that the police would find her someday so that the family could take a dignified farewell. 7 years after the disappearance, Kiplan's father heard about another case where the state justice system could not reach a verdict for a long time. The case was transferred to the federal level, whereby it could be completed. The man decided to use this idea and discussed it with the investigators. Despite the lack of new evidence, two factors could change the course of events. First, all suspects and witnesses would have to testify under oath, and if it turned out that someone had lied, consequences would threaten. Second, by this time 8 years had passed since Kiplan's disappearance, and the suspects had meanwhile started families and begun a new life. The investigators hoped that one of them would tell the truth. Ultimately, thanks to the efforts of the relatives and investigators, the case came before a grand jury, whose hearings extended over several years. Numerous witnesses participated and brought many new pieces of information. One witness remembered how Rocker was dissatisfied with Tim after the lie detector test because Tim had written his statements on paper. Suddenly, another witness, Chris's wife, told a surprising story. One day, she and her husband were watching a crime comedy, and at some point she jokingly asked him about the worst deed he had committed in his life. Chris, with a serious expression, answered, "What if I tell you that I am involved in the Kiplan case?" His wife was shocked by his words. When he saw her reaction, Chris quickly added that it was just a joke. But she could not shake the feeling that he was telling the truth. Two other witnesses who were at a party with Tim a few years ago remembered how a news report about Kiplan's disappearance was running on television. Tim said at that time that it was his deed. Over the years, many have heard strange statements from Tim. Some he told that he knew how such deeds were committed, and that he had already done something like that. To others, he hinted or said directly that he had something to do with Kiplan's disappearance, and mentioned various details. But here there was an important point. Tim named various locations, and the investigators who checked them found no evidence. During these hearings, a fact also came to light that, without exaggeration, shocked all those present. A few years ago, the investigators found out that the alibi of the 3 young men was fabricated. They claimed they had helped Tim install the lighting and played football in the hall, but that evening, a choir rehearsal was taking place there. None of the choir members saw them, which ruled out their presence in the hall. The investigators were annoyed that this choir had not been mentioned during the entire investigation. But now the truth came to light. Although none of the accused confessed during these hearings, there was still progress. The judge concluded that all 3 men had lied under oath and sentenced them accordingly. At the end of 2005, Tim was found guilty on 15 counts of perjury and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Chris received 5 years and Booker 4. The difference in sentences resulted from the fact that most of the statements were directed against Tim. For the investigators, this was just the beginning. Now that all 3 suspects had been convicted at the federal level for perjury, they decided to bring the case before a state court to achieve convictions. In the investigators' opinion, Tim, Chris, and Booker were involved in the Kiplan case. The police also believed that 2 more of their friends knew about the crime and deliberately withheld information. As a result, Tim and Chris were charged again, and preparation for a new trial began. The investigators received much new information from witnesses who willingly revealed important details. Numerous statements pointed to different stories from the suspects, which further ignited the investigators' interest. Tim's sister told that her brother had often lied, and she had long suspected that he might be involved in this incident. Against this background, a long-awaited event occurred. Tim was offered a deal where he would be punished more leniently in exchange for a confession, and he agreed. However, this deal had its peculiarities. First, according to the terms of the agreement, he faced no severe prison sentence, since the punishment could be combined with that for false statements. Moreover, he did not have to betray his accomplices. His confession was as follows. After lunch, he, Kiplan, and another person drove to the canyon. Tim stayed in the car while Kiplan and the other person went into the canyon. About 30 minutes later, Tim decided to follow them. There's something happened that I cannot tell on YouTube, but Tim was not the main culprit. He only helped to cover up the traces. After that, the two returned to the car and drove away. But in the evening, they came back to the canyon to eliminate the remaining evidence. Tim stubbornly refused to reveal where they had hidden the evidence and would not name the person who was with him. Because of this behavior, he was found guilty. In the year 2021, he had the opportunity to be released early, but the court rejected his petition because he did not reveal all the details of the case. Now Tim can only be released in the year 2026. Chris and Roker have already served their sentences for false statements. The investigators could not prove their involvement in the disappearance. After Tim's confession, the police still do not know who was with him. Without additional evidence, this cannot be determined. Perhaps Tim does not want to endanger his friends. Although many questions remain open in this case, no one doubts the guilt of these three people anymore.